What if I told you that everything you know about love is a lie? That the woman you think you're in love with is not who you think she is? What if that feels like it's holding you together is actually the very thing breaking you apart? Are you truly in love, or are you simply trapped in a game of emotional control? What if the real question isn't about how to win her heart, but how to escape the emotional prison you've locked yourself in? Because here's the shocking truth. Love isn't about hearts and flowers. It's about power and control. And you've been trained to believe that love means submission. But what if the love you're chasing is just an illusion? The woman you adore, the one who has your attention, she didn't ask for this throne. You built it. You handed her the crown. But now you're the one kneeling, calling it romance. What if it's not her you're in love with at all? What if you're just hypnotized by the game she's playing? Stay with me, because the truth you've been avoiding might just change everything. You're staring at her, the curve of her smile, the way she glances at her phone, then at you, like she's measuring how much power she still has. You laugh at her joke, even if it's not funny. You try to read her silences like scripture. You wake up thinking about what she needs. You go to sleep wondering if you were enough. But here's what you don't realize. You're not in love. You're in submission, not to her body, not to her soul, but to her attention, to her approval, to the illusion that her warmth means something more than leverage. She didn't ask for this throne, but you built it, and now you kneel in front of it, calling it romance. But this isn't about her. It's about the blindfold, the one you were handed long before you met her. Back when they told you, make her happy, be a gentleman, never let her cry. Back when love meant obedience and masculinity meant compliance. Back when the world taught you to serve the feminine, not see it. Because here's the truth no one wants you to know. Women don't fear men who love them. They fear men who see through them. They fear the man who looks at her, not with desire, but with clarity. Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. But what if the unexamined love is the real trap? What if your heartbreak isn't from love, but from losing your hypnotist? What if the woman you love is just a mask, a story crafted by culture, by memory, by your deepest fears? What if you're not in love, but in hypnosis? And what if waking up isn't about getting over her? What if it's about getting over who you became for her? From the moment you opened your eyes to the world, there was a story waiting for you. She was in it, beautiful, software pure. She was the princess in the castle, the mother who'd never leave, the girl who'd never lie. You were told she would cry but never manipulate, that she would feel but never scheme, that her heart was pure, so pure in fact that questioning her was an act of cruelty. You believed it. We all did. But Socrates would stop you mid-sentence and ask why. But here's the real question. What if everything you've been taught about love is holding you back? What if the key to freedom is not chasing after her, but waking up to the truth you've been avoiding? Stay with me, because the answer will change the way you look at relationships forever. Why do you believe she's incapable of deception? Why do you assume her softness means moral superiority? Who taught you that her tears are truth? It started early. In fairy tales, the villain was always the stepmother, the wicked queen, twisted not because she was cunning, but because she dared to act. While the true woman, the ideal, was passive, waiting, deserving. Always deserving. Movies didn't help either. The love interest was never flawed, only misunderstood. If she hurt you, it was because she was healing. If she ghosted you, it was because she was confused. If she cheated, it was because you failed to see her worth. Somehow she remained the victim, even when she held the knife. We were taught to see women as emotional creatures, but never as emotional tacticians. We were taught they feel deeply, but not that they could use those feelings as tools, or weapons, or currency. So when she bombards you with affection one day, then pulls away the next, you call it mood swings, not control. When she guilts you for spending time with friends, you call it love, not territory. When she opens up only to punish you with silence later, you call it sensitivity, not strategy. It's not that women are evil, they're human. But the pedestal you placed her on, that's the illusion. She has light, yes, but also shadow. She nurtures, but she can also manipulate. She can give endlessly and withdraw just as quickly if it suits her needs. She can smile while she shames you, hug you while she tests you, love you, and still leave you broken if that love no longer serves her. The problem isn't her complexity, it's your refusal to see it, because you were never taught to. So Socrates would ask again, what is virtue if it hides behind charm? Maybe the real question is, how many of your wounds were caused by someone you thought could never harm you? And how long have you called that wound love? Think back. Back to when you were just a boy. You were told to be nice, to be gentle, to be good. But what did good really mean? It meant not making her cry, not raising your voice, not saying no. It meant walking on eggshells because one frown from your mother, your teacher, your sister meant you'd failed. Not as a person, as a boy. You were taught without words that her emotions were your responsibility. If she was upset, you did something wrong. If she was distant, you had to win her back. If she was cold, you had to warm her with your effort. This wasn't empathy, it was obedience. This wasn't love, it was emotional programming. And over time, it became your default setting. You learned to read her face before your own feelings. You learned to apologize before even knowing what you did wrong. You learned to suppress your anger, your confusion, your truth, because being good meant making her comfortable, not being yourself. So what happens when that boy grows into a man? He becomes addicted to her approval. He fears conflict because deep down, he still believes upsetting her makes him bad. He avoids rejection like death because he doesn't just want her love. He needs her validation to feel like a man. And so he becomes trapped, not by her, but by the little boy inside him who still thinks, if she's not happy with me, I'm worthless. This is why you chase her, why you feel crushed when she pulls away, why you panic when she's silent, because your self-worth is still attached to her mood. Not because you're weak, but because you were trained. Trained to put her feelings above your own truth. Trained to feel guilty for saying no. Trained to think love means sacrifice, even if the sacrifice is your identity. And the worst part? Most of this happened long before you ever fell in love. It happened in school when you were told boys don't hit girls, even when they hit first. It happened when your dad was scolded for raising his voice, but your mom wasn't because she was just emotional. It happened when every story, every show, every lesson told you that being a good man meant being the shield, even when you were bleeding. But here's the shift. You are not her emotional servant. You don't have to earn your worth through suffering. You don't need her approval to be whole. You were not born to orbit someone else's needs. Socrates never said, make her happy. He said, know thyself. And maybe that's the rebellion she was never prepared for. A man who chooses truth over applause, self-awareness over obedience, and soul over silence. There's a reason the world fears thinkers, not the loud ones, the quiet ones. The men who don't react, who observe, who question. Socrates, Nietzsche, Jung. Men who didn't fit in because they refused to play along. They weren't seduced by flattery. They weren't driven by approval. They didn't chase applause. They chased truth. And that made them dangerous because you can't manipulate a man who isn't emotionally dependent. You can't guilt trip a man who has already faced his own shadow. You can't dangle intimacy like a prize in front of someone who doesn't need to win you to feel complete. And that's where the tension begins. Because while many women live in the world of feeling, nuance, and emotional reading, men like Socrates live in the world of thought, precision, logic, inquiry. To find yourself, think for yourself, Socrates said. But what happens when thinking for yourself means seeing through someone else? A man who thinks deeply becomes a mirror, and mirrors are terrifying to those who aren't ready to be seen. This is why the intellectual man, who sees patterns instead of just moments, is often cast aside. Not because he's cold, but because he can't be easily seduced by emotion. He doesn't confuse a passionate night with a deep bond. He doesn't mistake drama for connection. He doesn't melt when you cry. He listens. He understands, but he doesn't crumble. And that, ironically, is what makes him magnetic. Because what's more addictive than someone who doesn't need you? The emotionally unavailable man often becomes the fantasy, not because he's kind, but because he's stable. He creates tension without even trying. He pulls her in by doing the one thing that most men never do. Nothing. He doesn't chase. He doesn't explain. He doesn't beg to be understood, because he understands himself. Women who are used to emotional control find this unnerving. They can't read him, can't predict him, can't move him with silence or seduction. It's not rejection, it's immunity. And it forces a question many would rather not face. What do I become when I can no longer control the emotional temperature of the room? A man who sees clearly becomes a disruption to the script. He can't be played because he's not playing. He is not dangerous because he wants power. He's dangerous because he doesn't need it. And in a world built on emotional leverage, that's the one man you can't enslave. Desire is not born from abundance. It's born from uncertainty. The moment you stop chasing her, everything shifts. Not because you become cruel, but because you become still. And stillness is terrifying to someone used to being the storm. She sends the text. You see it, but don't reply. Not because you're playing a game, but because your world no longer revolves around her orbit. And suddenly the silence feels louder than words. Why? Because when you don't chase, you change the polarity. You become the unpredictable force, the unknown outcome. And in the human brain, nothing spikes desire more than unpredictability. Neuroscience calls it intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. When the reward is unpredictable, the brain releases more dopamine, not less. So when you were texting back instantly, reassuring her constantly, always available, her brain categorized you as safe, but not exciting. Excitement lives in the unknown. And when you become unavailable, not out of cruelty but out of clarity, you trigger something far deeper than attraction. You trigger craving, because she can no longer predict your attention. She no longer controls your emotional response. She's no longer the gravitational center. You are. And that power doesn't come from manipulation. It comes from detachment, from the realization that her reaction is not your responsibility, that her validation is not your oxygen. This is where Socratic thinking becomes lethal. Socrates wasn't emotionless. He simply refused to depend on emotion. He observed life. He questioned it, but he never needed it to obey him. And that's where freedom is born. Not in control, but in clarity. You're not indifferent because you're broken. You're indifferent because you've remembered who you are. You've stopped feeding the loop, the reward-punishment cycle, the need to be needed. And when that happens, she spirals. Not because you hurt her, but because you stopped letting her moods determine your movements. You're no longer a puppet in her story. You've become the silence she can't decode. The man who doesn't move just because she blinks. And in a world where everyone is performing to be liked, the one who no longer performs becomes unforgettable. You think you're in love. You feel it in every cell. The warmth, the highs, the intoxicating rush when she looks at you, when she reaches for your hand. But what if it's not love? What if it's something deeper, something more complicated, something darker? Here's the truth no one talks about. You're not in love with her. You're in love with the chase. You're in love with the cycle she's put you through, time and time again. The moments of closeness followed by cold distance. The affection that never quite fills you. The love that always feels just out of reach. This isn't connection, it's trauma bonding. What she gives you, just enough to keep you hungry, but never enough to satisfy you, isn't love. It's a game, a dance, a loop. Your abandonment wound is wide open. And every time she pulls away, every time she makes you feel like you're losing her, your subconscious mind panics. That panic, it feels familiar. It feels like something you felt before, when you were a child, when you learned that love meant survival, but also that love could be taken away, that the affection you craved could vanish in the blink of an eye. She knows this, and she plays to it. With each sweet word, each seductive glance, she keeps you hooked, just enough to make you need her more. She knows that you will come running back. She knows that you'll feel empty when she's distant, and she knows that this feeling will bring you right back into her orbit. You've become addicted to her approval, addicted to the way she makes you feel when she's present. But when she's absent, that's when the real torture begins. But let's get this straight. This isn't love. This is psychological dependency. And you're not the only one trapped in it. This loop happens over and over in relationships, especially those that seem like they could be everything, but always fall short. It feels like love, but it isn't. It's a psychological construct designed to keep you hooked. It's manipulation disguised as affection. It's the promise of something you will never fully receive, keeping you just hungry enough to keep chasing. But here's the catch. You were never in love with her. You were in love with the feeling of need. You were in love with her power over you. She could be anyone. The pattern, the cycle, would still be the same. You would still feel the void every time she pulls away. You would still return again and again, chasing that fleeting sense of wholeness. Socrates once said, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life." But in love, perhaps we should say, beware the illusion of a busy heart. How many of us are living in a constant emotional cycle, telling ourselves it's love when it's really just an addiction to the drama, the highs and lows that keep our hearts in constant motion? This isn't a life. This isn't love. This is a loop, a never-ending cycle that keeps you trapped, keeps you in the illusion that if you just chase a little more, you'll get what you need. You'll finally be enough. But you're never enough, and she's never enough. Because it's not about each other. It's about the pattern, the pain, the longing, the chase. And here's the painful truth. You'll never be full until you realize that the love you're seeking is within you, not in someone else's hands, not in someone else's control. And until you let go of the loop, you'll never know the difference between true love and the addiction to being needed. It's time to grieve the illusion. It's time to step out of the cycle and let yourself heal. Let go of the pattern. Let go of the chase. Because love that's truly fulfilling doesn't come with a price tag. It comes with peace, and it comes with self. There's a man who doesn't chase. He doesn't run after the approval of others. He doesn't plead for attention. He doesn't beg for love. He doesn't play games. But that man, he's more magnetic than any other. We've all been taught that to win with women, or to win in life, you have to be emotionally distant, detached, or even cold. Society says don't be too available. Don't show your feelings too easily. Make them work for your attention. And for years, we've confused that with strength. But let's take a step back. True power doesn't come from manipulating people. It doesn't come from holding emotions hostage or playing mind games to get someone to notice you. True power comes from something deeper, from the ability to detach yourself from the outcome, from being so self-aware, so rooted in your own sense of self, that no external influence, whether it's a person, a situation, or a feeling, can throw you off balance. That's the Socratic alpha. He doesn't chase, he observes. He doesn't need to impress. He doesn't need to be validated. He simply is. His power comes not from force, but from freedom. He is neither aggressive nor submissive. He is disciplined, reflective, detached, but not indifferent. He chooses when to engage, not because he wants to win, but because he wants to understand. Think about Socrates. He didn't force his ideas onto others. He didn't try to control their emotions or make them believe. Instead, he asked questions. He didn't beg, he revealed. He never forced anyone to think like him. He simply helped them realize that their answers were within them all along. This is the ultimate form of power. Self-awareness, the ability to see clearly and to allow others to see themselves. Not by manipulation, but by revealing the truth in a way they can't ignore. This doesn't mean you withhold love or affection. It doesn't mean you shut yourself off from others. It means you let go of needing to control the situation. You stop playing the emotional chess game. You stop chasing approval because you already know your worth. You can't be hurt by someone who doesn't control your emotions. You can't be swayed by someone who doesn't hold the keys to your happiness. And here's the most liberating truth of all. You don't need to chase, you need to observe. Let them chase you with their actions, not their words. Let them seek your presence. not your approval. When you realize this, something profound happens. You stop performing. You stop chasing. You stop being a puppet to someone else's emotional game. Instead, you become a force of nature, unmoved, unshaken, unmoved by anyone who doesn't respect your worth. This isn't just about winning women. This is about winning your life back. The moment you wake up, something shifts, something profound. It's subtle at first, a quiet realization in the depths of your mind. But over time, it becomes impossible to ignore. You no longer need her approval. You no longer crave validation from anyone. You start to see through the illusion, the act that you were once a part of, the emotional games, the subtle manipulation, the silent control. All of it becomes so painfully obvious. And the truth is both liberating and isolating. You're free from the chains of expectation. But that freedom, it makes you a threat. The world isn't ready for a man who's awake. Society isn't built for someone who doesn't need to play by its rules. The system isn't designed for people who see beyond the surface. And the people who thrive in that system, they're terrified of anyone who dares to break free. That's why you're labeled toxic, cold, misogynistic. Not because you are, but because you've stopped serving the system. You've stopped chasing the illusion of love, affection, and attention. You no longer fall for the tricks, the charm, the promises that were once enough to keep you in line. You've seen the game, and you've chosen not to play. And when you stop playing, they call you the villain, because it's easier to label someone as toxic than to face the truth they bring. It's easier to call you cold than to admit that you've become immune to the emotional manipulation. It's easier to call you bitter than to question the very things that have held you captive for so long. They'll say, "You must hate women. You're too harsh, you're jaded, you're broken." But none of that is true. You don't hate women. You don't hate love. You've simply stopped worshiping illusions. You've stopped pretending that the emotional chaos is the only way to feel alive. You've stopped believing that love should hurt, should drain, should manipulate. You've stopped seeing the world through the lens of dependency and need. And that's when the truth becomes too much to bear for those who still live in the illusion. When you stop being her servant, when you stop conforming to the role they've assigned you, they'll call you a villain. They'll vilify you for daring to break the cycle. But here's the thing. You're not the villain. You're the awakening. You're the one who saw through the mask. And while the world may fear the truth is the only thing that can set you free. The truth is, she never feared your aggression. She never feared your anger. She never feared your outbursts or your emotional reactions. What she feared, what they all fear, is your sight, your ability to see through the illusion, your ability to understand the game and still choose not to play. What they truly fear is the power of your detachment. When you stop chasing, when you stop seeking her approval, when you stop needing her love to feel whole, you become something they never prepared for. You become a force that cannot be controlled. A man who doesn't react, who doesn't need, who doesn't beg. You become Socrates with a spine. Socrates wasn't afraid of being alone. He wasn't afraid of rejection. He wasn't afraid of the consequences of thinking differently. He was free in a way that most people can't understand, and the world feared him for it. The woman watching this video, or the collective feminine energy that fuels these dynamics, they never feared the angry, the aggressive, the loud. They feared the silent rebel, the man who could look at the chaos of the emotional world and walk away, the man who could choose solitude over seduction. Because when you walk away from their games, when you stop feeding the emotional circus, you take away their power, and that's a power they can't handle. Not all women manipulate. Some women love deeply. Some women are kind, gentle, and authentic. But the ones who do manipulate, the ones who live for the drama, for the highs and lows, pray you never wake up. Because when you do, you stop being a pawn. You stop being a tool in their emotional chess game. And you become the one thing that terrifies them. A man who is free. A man who sees. A man who understands the cost of playing their game. A man who has looked into the abyss of emotional manipulation and said, "I choose to walk away." There is no hatred in this. There is no bitterness. There is only a man who finally sees, who understands, and who has decided that his peace is worth more than any temporary validation. No chase, no resentment, just a man. A man who has found his truth and no longer needs to prove it to anyone. And in the silence that follows, there is power. There is clarity. There is the kind of freedom that no one can take from you. Because the moment you stop being her servant, you become your own king. So what's the truth you've been avoiding all this time? Are you ready to break free from the illusion and step into the power of self-awareness? If this video opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button for more content that challenges the way you see the world. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. How have you been caught in the game? And what will you do to wake up? Let's talk. Stay aware, stay free.